Alright, so we're going to just go a brief rundown of the process prior to texturing, so modeling, UVing, baking out the maps. It was a pretty basic process, really. Feel free to skip over this if you're not, if you're already familiar with the workflow. So basically, just start with high poly sculpting in ZBrush, large forms to small forms. Again, nothing too different to what you've probably already heard a million times. After a point, I take it back into Maya and then just did a quick low poly pass to make it easier to then refine the sculpt back in ZBrush. I created some individual teeth, which and then like slotted up into the skull. Probably not necessary, but sometimes you just gotta do it. And then created the jawbone, used dynameshed the jawbone and the skull part together. Yeah, just constantly refining the sculpt basically. Then once the high poly's done, bring it back into Maya, and then again work on the low poly. After your low poly's done, UV. Bring up the UVs. Nothing difficult, nothing complex, just very simple. And once UVs are done, bring your high poly and low poly into marmoset. Bake your normals, your ambient occlusion, and your curvature. I don't really tend to bake anything else because I can just bake the world space normal and position map within Painter itself, and that's very simple to do. After I've got all the bakes ready, I'll bring it into Painter, and if I need to, if there are a lot of like floating meshes when baking the ambient occlusion, I'll demonstrate with this picture here. This isn't obviously the current prop, but it's a different prop. It's Merlin's wand. You can see with the ambient occlusion bake, if you have intersecting meshes and floating geometry, you're gonna get these black lines where the two models intersect. And I like to, well, depending on what you need to do, you might not need to do it, depending on the severity of the issue as well. But if you bring it into Painter, you create a fill layer, you bring your ambient occlusion map, plug it into the fill layer, and then paint directly onto that layer, and paint out yourself the black areas, so you get something more like this as an end result. And then you can export that out and use that as your ambient occlusion, and that should clear up a lot of errors if you come to using stuff like smart masks in Painter. But again, it's only if you need to, really. And with Mordred's Helm, there wasn't really any of those issues, so I didn't really need to do that. Alright, another thing to note is the helmet, the model that you get in your files doesn't include this inner head cage with the cloth. It wasn't exactly something I wanted to cover or needed to cover, really. I just wanted to focus on the metal itself and the height blending between that. So you're just going to get the skull and not the cloth or anything inside, as it's not particularly necessary. But you can see that this is how I did it, this is how I modelled it. I just extracted the faces from the high poly and created a model from that. Nothing too difficult there. Right, so now that we've gone over that process, we're going to go and start texturing and do a first pass in Painter, get some smart materials on very roughly, and then going to procedural textures and looking at how to create the flaking rust effect in the rust texture, and a few examples of custom nodes and other tricks that I use when creating procedural textures. Alright, thank you very much.